Record this. Cool. All right. Welcome everyone to tonight's live. Basically going to be going over a diet, and I'm going to be covering basically how to optimize a diet for vitamin D. There's a lot of things I'm going to be covering today. So one of the first things that I want to make sure that I address before I get started is that one of the things that I want you to get out of tonight's training is I want you to get a big picture of everything that we really have to look at when it comes to optimizing your diet. This may seem like information overload, but here's the thing. There's many ways that you can optimize your diet. And even though I'm going to kind of like be a little bit all over the place, I'm going to bring it home and really just show you what it is that you need to do, especially for the 30-day challenge. So this is basically designed to help you understand, like why do we start with water, hydration, minerals, vitamin D, and now we're going to be moving into diet. How do we move forward, from here? And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking, an example of a diet that I was sent over, and I'm just going to break it down. I'm going to go into detail. I'm going to dive deep into it and really cover a lot of different aspects of diet. Okay, when I think about diet, I think of diet in a very different way. Okay, I don't think of diet in terms of like carbohydrates and calories and like basic stuff like that. Like I think of diet in different layers, and so I want to show you what some of those layers are, so that you're aware of what we're really dealing with here. So before I go into this diet, let me share my screen here. And what I'm going to be doing is do a quick recap. So, all right, so I'm going to be doing a quick recap of, what we've covered so far, for this 30-day challenge, and then how diet is going to play a role, moving forward here. So here we go. All right, so if you're participating in, the 30-day, challenge, basically what we start out with is water, right? H2O, and then we add minerals. Okay, so here's what I want you to keep in mind and think. Okay, water and minerals, what they're really doing for you more than anything is that they are essentially allowing you to take the food that you're eating and they are helping you digest. Okay, the better your digestion, the more likely that your body's going to be able to get the nutrients that it needs. And here's the relationship, the thing that I want you to get out of this. Okay, all of the nutrients that your body makes in your gut, all of these nutrients are essentially designed to feed your mitochondria. Okay, your mitochondria, this is basically what produces energy. So you can be eating food, even if it's healthy or whatever, if you're not digesting it, you're not basically producing nutrients. And if you're not producing nutrients, you're not feeding your mitochondria, therefore you're not producing energy. Okay, so that's basically this is basically what this is doing. The second step that we are basically covering in this program is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D, I want you to keep in mind this analogy that our guts are exactly like the root system of a tree, right? And just like a tree, we need water, minerals, We need the proper pH, the proper temperature, but a tree doesn't grow without sunshine, right? That's where we get vitamin D. This is basically the energy that the tree picks up, right? The leaves have chlorophyll. Chlorophyll basically absorb sunlight, and that's what allows a tree to grow. Well, in our body, basically the same thing happens is we take vitamin D, and that's what allows us to absorb nutrients from our gut. And so what a lot of people experience when they're dehydrated, when they're low in vitamin D, is they become nutrient deficient. And so when I look at diet, I'm looking at all of these different nutrients that people may be deficient on, which could be, things like magnesium, iron, selenium, zinc. There's a whole variety of these nutrients. But here's what I want you to keep in mind. You can try to feed yourself food, supplements, and whatever else to try to like get these nutrients into your body, but if you don't have vitamin D, your body's not going to uptake, right? And so this is basically what we're trying to help our guts do, is we're trying to help it digest food, but we're also trying to help it uptake the nutrients, and that's the role of vitamin D. Now the problem that we come across here is that vitamin D, you can't just take vitamin D and expect the body to uptake it, right? Because this is also a nutrient in a way, right? But this is kind of like what we need in order to uptake some of these other nutrients. What we need to uptake vitamin D is magnesium, right? This is why magnesium is so important. This is why I start out everyone with magnesium, right? To feed your mitochondria, you need coenzyme Q10, you need iron, you need riboflavin, and like all these other nutrients. The reason why people ask me about supplements or basically nutrients that we need to make energy, and the reason why I don't tell people to start taking these supplements right away is because I know that if they're not hydrated, if they don't have magnesium, if they're deficient in vitamin D, then their body's not going to be able to uptake it, right? So getting all of these other supplements is basically a waste of money, which is why I get a lot of people that come to me and they're already taking a bunch of supplements, but they feel like it's doing nothing for them. And this is exactly why this is happening. So what I want to show you now, through this diet is basically I want to walk you through how your diet can actually be affecting both magnesium, vitamin D, and some of these other, nutrient deficiencies. So scroll down here. All right. So first of all, with this, I want to remind everyone that when I started this, my diet was very different than what it is right now. Okay. And the ways that I'm designing my programs is for not change, it's not for supplementing, it's literally for transformation, because that's really what it takes. When I look back at what I used to eat and what I eat now, it's very different. And it's not that I wouldn't eat or don't like to eat, some of these foods that I see. Like I still crave a lot of those other foods, but my transformation is really what has allowed me to transform and really change my diet. Now, one thing that I want to point out first of all, okay, when I look at, a grouping of diets like this, the first thing that I think of, okay, that I want you to get out of this, it's not about improving your food. It's not about improving like the quality of the food just once or anything like that. You got to remember that the way that diet works, the way that health works, it's a long process where if you're doing the right thing, this is how it looks. Changes don't seem to improve right away, but then you get that upward exponential growth. But similarly, if you don't do the right things day in and day out, it doesn't seem like it's doing much harm, but long term, you have the opposite effect. And so, what I want to point out, first of all, is that with certain foods, okay, for example, I'm going to start out with, sugar in general. Okay. And it's not just for this diet. I used to eat a lot of sugar. I used to brew beer. And so I used to drink, quite a bit of beer, which, alcohol is in a way a form of concentrated sugar. And I know that because of that part of my diet where I was essentially eating a lot of carbohydrates, what begins to happen is that you're eating it and you're kind of like you said, you feel good, you seem to be surviving, whatever, but then there comes a point where what changes is your gut flora. Once your gut flora changes, that's where you begin to experience things where all of a sudden, if I tell you to make a change in your diet, you're not going to see a difference. And not only that, even if you're eating kale, which is supposedly a healthy food, what I want people to understand is that when you're eating kale, if you have bad bacteria in your gut, you're still going to be feeding the bad bacteria. So no matter how healthy your food gets at this point, what we're really looking to alter and change is your microbiome. And this doesn't happen by changing your food one day or 2 days. It's really a combination of changing out your food, but then also detoxing your body. And so I want to point out a couple of these different things. I want you to keep this in mind so that you understand why the changes that I make are actually very different, and also to help you understand that, hey, some of the changes that you're going to have to make, if I were to just give you like the perfect diet, even if if you want to look at, not that my diet is the perfect diet, but if you want to compare this diet to like my diet, I wake up and I basically drink water and minerals up until about 11 a.m. And then at 11 a.m., I have some reishi mushroom right now. It's kind of what I'm doing. And then right around 1 p.m., I have bone broth. And then usually around 6, 7 p.m., today's going to be 7 right after this webinar, I do, basically beef, salt, sauerkraut, and avocado. Okay, this is my current diet. It's not what I'm going to stay on. This is just what I'm doing right now. Even if you were to switch from this diet, or from whatever diet you're on right now, and go into my diet, the thing is that you probably don't have the microbiome to be able to digest and uptake the nutrients from these foods. And I'll also supplement, I guess, with beef organs. So I guess I'll do here organs. You still probably wouldn't be able to digest or uptake these nutrients. So it's not a matter of just switching out your diet, right? And so the way that I have to work with people is more or less a progression. And my biggest thing, like the biggest change that I always try to get people to make, is to tweak their diet in a way that allows them to absorb vitamin D, right? And so this whole training, what I want you to focus on is vitamin D. And so some things that I want you to remember about vitamin D is that it's a fat soluble vitamin, right? And although I just deleted my diet, you can kind of like notice that my diet was primarily fat, right? You got bone broth, that's basically fat. You got beef, the beef that I get, it's either ground beef or, 80-20, 80% and 20% fat, or ribeye cuts, which are, really fatty cuts. That's because I look for fat. Um, this is kind of like what my diet, has turned into. Now, before I did this diet, I was on a plant-based ketogenic diet. And it's the same thing, right? I had coconut oil, avocado, and hemp seeds as the base. So all of these were fats. So you can kind of start to see why my diet was primarily fats. It was because I was low in vitamin D when I started my journey. My vitamin D levels were at 22 nanograms per deciliter. Okay. Here's the biggest thing with vitamin D. Vitamin D is what strengthens your mitochondria and your gut flora. When you have low vitamin D levels, your immune system, your gut flora weakens. Okay, and you can Google this, vitamin D immune system, and you'll see there's a direct correlation in your vitamin D levels. The lower they are, the lower your immune system, which means the lower your ability to digest and uptake food. That means that less nutrients feed your mitochondria. Your mitochondria make energy, and energy is what your body uses to strengthen your gut flora. This is the cycle that you want to be in. When you get into a vicious cycle where you damage your gut flora, now you're not producing nutrients or uptaking nutrients, you're not making energy, so now you can't heal. That's what I covered last week when I showed you the videos with Dr. Jerry Tennant, where he's talking about how you heal is through voltage, right? You increase your voltage, you increase your energy. This is basically what you're doing. So all of this being said, let's dive deep into this diet and let me start pointing out different things. So essentially what we want to do is we want to strengthen our gut flora. And the way we strengthen our gut flora is we got to feed our mitochondria. Okay. The way we feed our mitochondria is we need nutrients like iron, coenzyme Q10, and we need to have vitamin D levels, to be normal. And so what affects vitamin D is, well, what you need is good, healthy fats, which we covered here: coconut oil, avocado, hemp seeds. What affects vitamin D is bad fats. Okay, there's a difference between, there's good versus bad fats. So good fats will be, what I mentioned here: coconut oil, avocado, hemp seeds. Bad fats are things like vegetable oils, or when you're eating things like, like pepperoni. The way that some of these, especially like if they're conventionally grown, you got to look at the fat profile in these. Okay. Chick-fil-A. Here's the thing. I used to eat Chick-fil-A, right? And I'm telling you, like, I'm normal. I still crave those waffle cut fries. Like, I like all of this stuff just as much. But here's what I've learned when it comes to what I would call conventional chicken, things like chicken and rice and some of these other foods. There tends to be a lot of heavy metals in a lot of these conventionally grown, chicken and rice and other foods. And that's because a lot of these foods, the way that they are grown with with pesticides and stuff like that. I mean, in the case of chicken, you don't think of, pesticides being an issue, but a lot of these chickens are grain fed, and it's the grain that is exposed to pesticides, right? And so the grain goes into the chicken is exposed to pesticides, heavy metals, and all these things, and then that basically ends up in your body. And heavy metals is basically one of the things that affects your mitochondria. But now in my mind, okay, remember, I don't think just about, conventional organic minerals and all these things. If there are heavy metals in your body, that is basically one of the things that brings about things like yeast overgrowth, mold, parasites. And this is where I go back to, if you've been eating these foods for a long time, like I said, I used to eat that stuff all the time, right? And, when I was in high school and, throughout my 20s, and you know what? I was fine, right? It just felt like nothing was happening. But once my microbiome changed, that's when that's when shit hit the fan, to put it like, to just be direct. That's basically what happens, right? Your microbiome changes, you get all this bad stuff. All of a sudden, it's hard to, you can't just cut out grains and sugar and expect to get better. Now you have to do all this work to restructure your gut flora. But I'm telling you, like, this is basically the kind of stuff that I had to remove in order to restructure my gut flora, right? So now it's not going to be just a matter of adding good foods, but now we're going to have to go in and, like, in the case of this specific diet, like, now this gives me an idea of how would I, if this were to be my diet, right? This is basically what I'm going to be doing during Energy Bootcamp. Is I'm basically putting myself in the shoes of, in your shoes, and essentially, okay, if this were to be me, this was my diet, and all of a sudden I gain all this knowledge that I now have, what would I do, right? So here, what I'm looking at is, okay, I need to find a way to add more fats to my diet. I need to basically find a way to get rid of some of these heavy metals. And here's the thing, rather than having people cut out foods like, sugar and stuff like that, here's the thing, when you have heavy metals, yeast overgrowth, and in the case of this diet, is basically a kind of like a carb fuel diet. What happens when you're in a diet like this, where you're not using fat as a source of fuel, is your insulin levels tend to go in a roller coaster. And in that roller coaster, when they're low, your body basically releases cortisol. And when it releases cortisol, you basically go into, I guess that's what gives a lot of people sometimes like anxiety, or you're just basically stressed out, and you go into this roller coaster that you can't really get out of, where your body is constantly craving sugar, right? So a lot of people get sugar cravings for this reason. And so this is a vicious cycle, where it's the opposite of this cycle, right? And so I know that cutting out sugar at this stage is nearly impossible, because, for one, your body's just constantly craving it. And two, even if you were to cut it out, you're not really going to see a huge improvement, at least not right away. So even though this is going to be a goal to cut it out, what I came up with is basically a way to restructure, diet in different ways, so that, the transition is easier, right? Because now we're not just dealing with changing out our diet. Now we're basically understanding that this is a long-term game. So this is going to require mindset, which is another area that, that I work with people, is basically how do I prepare people mentally for the journey? Okay, because this is basically transformation. I mean, interesting that, during these times we're kind of locked in and, not leaving the house. And, in a way this is forced, but how do you do it when it's, kind of like optional, where, I like to use the butterfly example. You have a caterpillar that goes into a little cocoon, right? That's where the transformation happens, right? You lock yourself in and you go on a long journey, and then you come out of that, and you fly, you're a butterfly, whatever. That's basically the transition process. And so let me show you a couple of ways that we're going to be able to do it. One way that I would do it here is I would basically make use of the knowledge of intermittent fasting. Now, with intermittent fasting, right? So whatever time your last meal is, whatever time that happens to be. I don't know if 2:15 is when you go to sleep, but I don't know what time your actual last meal is. So for the purposes of this example, I'm just going to say midnight. So let's say midnight, 12 hours later. Okay, 12 hours after your last meal, that's when your body enters the fasted state. Now, at this stage, Okay, this is where nuances begin to come in. Okay, at this stage, I don't recommend fasting. Okay, and here's the reason why. The reason why is because fasting is what breaks down fat. But at this stage, a lot of these foods that have heavy metals and all these other toxins, like here's the other thing with Chick-fil-A. These are usually cooked with vegetable oils. Vegetable oils are usually oxidized. They're very unstable. They release a lot of free radicals. This is basically what creates and accelerates aging in your cells. All of these are toxins. This is basically what's happening, is that you're eating these foods, and not only are they hard to digest, which basically clogs up your digestive tract, but now you have all of these toxins going into your body, and your liver, which is the filter that gets all of these toxins out, gets clogged. Once that gets clogged and your entire lymph system gets clogged, that's when your body begins to accumulate body fat. And body fat is basically designed to encapsulate and protect your body from toxins. So when you're fasting, you're breaking down fat, but that's basically exposing you to these toxins that they're already in your body, but now you're being exposed to them. And so prior to getting into fasting, what we do is we go in and we detox the liver. Okay, so that's the nuance here, right? But what we can start doing is understanding that, if you're going to sleep at midnight, or if your last meal is at midnight, and then that basically means that by noon, that's when your body's going to be entering the fasted state. Now, what you can do is, rather than entering the fasted state, one of the benefits of being in a fasted state is that your body burns fat as a source of fuel. Okay, this is how you train your body to burn fat as a source of fuel instead of burning sugar as a source of fuel. So with that understanding, what I would do is, your first meal of the day, potentially your first couple of meals of the day, this is where you want to incorporate healthy fats into your diet, right? So this is where you want to throw in things like avocados, eggs, like the egg yolks are really good. But then again, this is where other nuances come in, okay? There are people watching this video who maybe you're not able to eat dairy, right? Maybe eggs are highly allergenic, right? So this is why this has to be, this is why I work with people one-on-one to find different foods and different things that you can begin to eat. But the concept here is that you want to start to incorporate fat into your diet. And at this point, right, if you're doing the 30-day challenge, if you're drinking water, you're doing minerals, and then you're taking the vitamin D, now you're starting to understand that if you take your vitamin D at night or in the morning, if you start to feed your body healthy fat, that is basically what is going to allow your body to uptake that vitamin D. And as you begin to uptake vitamin D, your immune system is going to start to grow stronger, and that's going to allow you to reduce the bad bacteria, the bad yeast, and that's going to start to reduce your sugar craving. So over time, that's going to make it easier to cut out sugar. So at this point, it's not so much a matter of will. Now it's more of like, hey, you just don't crave sugar as much. But that's going to be because you're starting to get the right nutrients in, right? And so you can actually do this exact diet and just change it around to where you remove some of these carbohydrates. So even though kale is technically a healthy food, right? That's a fermentable carbohydrate. I would basically will look into moving that further down, and especially like sugar, instead of like cutting it out completely, like if you're not able to do that right now, I would maybe do it to where you're doing it like later in the day, the later the better, and start using your morning to boost your vitamin D. All right, so here on day 2, you got, for example, 3 eggs, bacon, and avocado. So like this day would be perfect for, your vitamin D. You take vitamin D and you have this for breakfast. now you have a carrier to uptake vitamin D. And again, like as you do more of this vitamin D, your body's going to get better at digesting and uptaking these foods. Now, obviously, there's different ways that you can improve, your diet. For example, eggs. If you're buying conventional, right, you kind of understand it's the same concept as conventional chicken. Eggs coming from conventional chickens are usually exposed to a lot of like heavy metals and a lot of like bad stuff. Not to mention that they don't really have as much nutrition in it. So this is where we can start looking into pasture raised instead of conventional. And so these are like small little changes that you can make one change at a time. So instead of trying to change the entire diet, I want you guys to think about what is the first thing in your day that you're doing that is basically helping you boost your vitamin D, and start with that, right? And again, this is a long process, but the more you do that, do the right thing over time, your microbiome is going to start to change, right? And you're looking for that balance. Okay, so as you begin to incorporate foods that boost your vitamin D, it gets easier to enter a fasted state. And this is where we start to combine detoxing the liver and cutting down sugar, to where all of a sudden you transition from eating sugar primarily to all of a sudden your diet consists primarily of fats. And a true transformation, the way that it looks, is it's not that you all of a sudden hate sugar and all these other foods. No, you'll still crave them, but you just feel so good, and you've experienced this transformation to where now you look at sugar and you're like, I could eat it, but I feel so good, and I would much rather eat these healthy fats, right? That's basically where I'm at, and it took me years to get to this point. Other things that I want to point out here. So on this diet, breakfast avocado toast, prepackaged. So anything that is packaged, remember, there's going to be a lot of food preservatives. And preservatives, what they're designed to do is to basically inhibit digestion. It's basically what keeps food from spoiling, from rotting, from fermenting. But those food preservatives, they're going into your gut. And so now you have digestive inhibitors. And so your body's not digesting that food properly, and therefore it's not uptaking nutrients. So whenever I see food like this, and think of it this way, is that's like throwing food down your digestive tract, but you're not really nourishing your body. Like you're literally just filling up your gut, and you're just feeding bad bacteria at this point, especially if you already have bad bacteria, right? So this kind of like knowledge and awareness, it's not necessarily designed for you to like change this overnight. It's more for you to just start to become aware of like, okay, I can start to see how the habit, okay, it's the habit that you're doing this on a consistent basis, not thinking much about it, that it's basically deteriorating your health, right? And so what I want to help you guys with is basically create habits that move your health forward over time, right? That's why the 30-day challenge, that's why it's about creating a habit of drinking water, right? It seems simple, but just the habit of drinking water alone improves your digestion. Just a habit of adding minerals to it improves your digestion, right? Vitamin D is not so much a habit, but we got to raise those levels. And then we start going into the habits of, eating a good, healthy breakfast. And then we start getting into habits of doing intermittent fasting, habits of, like I'm usually like constantly detoxing either my liver or my gut. And, that's just because the more that I detox, the more that I improve, the healthier that I get. I think of these habits. Let me see the right word. So we'll put it this way. the wrong habits age you fast. Okay. And I don't like to think of my habits as being anti-aging, but more like pro-health. Okay, they promote health, they promote vitality, right? They're not anti-aging. I don't need to anti-age because I don't feed my body sugar that creates toxins and other oxidative stress in the body. I feed it fuels that actually nourish the body, and this is basically how I think of food. Here's the other one: pork chops, white bean, ham, and white rice. And somewhere in the notes it said that these were cooked with vegetable oils, and so that's like the thing. Like if we can try to change out the the source of the pork, make sure that it's coming from a clean. Personally, I don't necessarily like well, I like pork, I like bacon. I don't think it's good for you, but there's a lot of debate in that, and so I don't like to do this whole like, oh, that's wrong, that's good, that's not good kind of thing. I just personally stay away from it. Okay, it's not that I haven't eaten it, it's not that I won't ever eat it again. I just personally don't necessarily like the idea of this being in my diet. But more important than that is, again, you got to watch out for the vegetable oils. If you're going to cook, whether it's pork, chicken, beef, or whatever, start looking for actual good, healthy fats, whether it's butter, ghee, tallow, some of these other healthy fats. Vegetable oils, a lot of people think that they're healthy and they're not. Okay, these have a lot of polyunsaturated fats, omega-6s are very hard to digest, they're unstable. Kit Kats, trust me, I used to eat a ton of Kit Kats, Butterfingers. My favorites were um, Hershey's cookies and cream. Those were used to be my favorite. And the problem with these is not so much the well, I mean the sugar, obviously, but a lot of these have basically high fructose corn syrup, which have heavy metals. High fructose corn syrup has things like mercury and other things like that. And again, these heavy metals, that's basically what is affecting your microbiome long term, right? So trust me, like I still crave like some of these, candy bars, and I used to eat a lot of them. But these are just, things that now that I'm aware of it, and now that I've gone through this process and transformation, like I know what it took to clean out all those heavy metals out of my body, and I'm still cleaning them up. Like they're not easy to clean. So like just bring awareness to what's going into your food, and remember that it's a long-term process that creates that change. Popcorn. I like popcorn. I don't think popcorn is bad for you, but corn itself is one of the three grains that have been hybridized, modified, and changed in a way that it's not what it used to be. Like if you actually go down to the south part of Mexico, Central America, where you can find heirloom corn, the original corn, corn is actually multi-colored. You get a lot of reds and purples. So most people think of corn as being yellow. There are some heirloom versions that are just yellow, but most of them are actually multicolored. And these multicolors, you show like the purples, same thing like with potatoes and other, of these heirloom varieties. The purple colors are very important in foods when you get into like the vegetable world. And that's because a lot of these purples are basically antioxidants, which is basically what fight off free radicals. Now, in the case of corn, like the modern day corn, the yellow corn, they're hybridized. They don't have a lot of these properties, and they have, the way that they're changed, the way that they're spliced and hybridized, it literally changes the structure of the grain inside. Like the starch changes. Think of the word starch. What does the word starch mean? it basically means to stiffen, right? There are grains that were essentially hybridized, or even like potato and things like that, that were used to create a type of starch to stiffen things, to make things like plastic. Starch is used to, like, when you iron clothes and you want to make sure that they're crisp, and you stiffen them up by spraying starch on them. A lot of that comes from these hybridized grains, and a lot of people are basically putting that into their bodies. So it's not so much that popcorn is bad, but it's what's the source of the corn. Is it heirloom? More than likely it's not. And then what kind of butter is going into them? Is it coming from conventional cows, which tend to eat grains, which again have been exposed to things like pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals and things like that, right? If you were to take corn that's heirloom and you actually use butter from pasture raised cows, right? Now all of a sudden this becomes a healthy snack, right? And this is the reason why I like to teach this stuff. It's because I think we live in a world where we've been exposed to all these commercialized versions of foods, and it has become normal for us to see it, to where now all of a sudden we think of pasture raised as being like, oh, that's just expensive food. No, like, that's normal food. Like all these other conventional cheap foods, like that's basically what what became the norm. And that's sad that people think that it's normal to buy these packaged foods, and that's, you have a lot of people that are now dealing with autoimmune conditions, and they think that their diets are normal, and this is like far from normal. All right, last here is Wednesday, all the same concept basically. Like this day you can take there's like, this day is like, like a good day, and we can play around with spacing out, um, like some of these meals. But, like, this wouldn't be like a bad day to boost your vitamin D, mostly because, your breakfast has, eggs, bacon, and avocado, which, they're healthy fats. Um, yes, even like bacon does tend to have like some good fats that will drive vitamin D, although I would prefer to choose another, like in my case, like I use bone broth for that reason, as my source of healthy fat. But again, I want you to start where you're at. And so anyways, I can go and like tear this diet apart even further. But again, my goal here is not to change out the entire diet, is to find out what is like one or two tweaks that we can make that you can actually, that you can actually stick to. And I'm going to help you with mindset to like, to make sure that you stick to it. But essentially your diet is going to remain the same until we're able to make a second tweak, and then a third change, and then a fourth change, until all of a sudden your entire diet is going to change. And you're going to look back and you're going to feel so much different, so much better, that you'll look back. Like I still look back and, like I used to eat at Chick-fil-A. I used to eat at, Sonic, and even Taco Bell when I was in high school. It's been a long time since I've had that, but I used to eat at all those places. And I remember like when I did one of my first juice fasts, I did a fast, and here's the thing that happens. As your microbiome changes, your microbiome is tied to your taste buds, right? There's already the concept that, what grows in your gut basically determines your taste buds. As your gut flora improves and your bad bacteria basically decreases, all of a sudden you start to crave different foods. All of a sudden, like, healthy foods seem to taste better. Not only that, your senses begin to heighten, right? Like your mind gets sharper, your vision can get better. Your hearing, like everything begins to heighten. Your taste buds begin to heighten. You start to taste flavors that you didn't. And one of the things that will happen as you begin to clean your gut, you can try to go back and eat some of these foods, and all of a sudden you're going to start to taste some of these chemicals that are in foods. Whereas right now you may not be tasting them. Once you clean up your body, you're going to start to taste some of these and you're going to go, wow, I can't believe that I used to eat that and not think anything off it. Right. And that's a change that's going to take, a while. But let me go back here and all right, since I have you here, do you have any questions about what I just covered?
So do I stick with taking my vitamin D at night, the fermented cod liver all at night, or do I switch to taking it in the morning if I'm doing my breakfast right?
I think in your case right now, I would probably stay at night until we can get you into a good routine of getting your breakfast, so that it can drive it, and then we can add, vitamin D to your morning routine. Because the way that I think of vitamin D at this phase for you is we're trying to like raise your vitamin D levels.
Mm-hmm.
That way, we can address some of your other nutrient deficiencies. Because without vitamin D, we can try to like, give your body coenzyme Q10 or iron or whatever else you may be deficient on, but it's not going to uptake that very well. But as your vitamin D levels begin to rise, then you can start to take on some of these other nutrients. And now your body's going to be able to uptake them. And once we get into that cycle, like that phase of, your body's uptaking nutrients, things begin to progress much faster. Like that's really like what I hope people experience in 30 days. And it's taken me a while to kind of narrow down and pinpoint like, okay, follow this process. I know it takes a while for your body to hydrate. So you need at least about 3 weeks. You need to mineralize, and especially with magnesium, because without magnesium, your body won't uptake vitamin D, right? So that's why that came before vitamin D. And then vitamin D is before all these other supplements. That's because without vitamin D, your body's just not going to be able to uptake some of these other nutrients. But once we get to that point, now we're playing and now we're actually like noticing changes. Now we can actually go and change your diet. And basically that's where I can actually go in and help you restructure your microbiome, because now I know, okay, now I know what I'm working with. Now I know what kind of detoxes are going to be better for you. What kind of diets we're going to be working with. And, and that's basically what this process allows me to do. So let me check the Facebook group here and see if there's any comments. Mariam. I had a coworker once that said they used Taco Bell as a laxative. That's funny. Do you think they hybridize and GMO'd food because they have to keep up with population needs, or did they do it for other monopoly reasons? I don't know 100% on that. I mean, the way that I think of the first story that I heard on hybridizing was actually from potatoes. And this is basically when the Spanish, conquistadors came to America, and they saw the tuber, the Peruvian papa, and they brought it back to Europe, and they tried to grow it. But the thing with like all plants, all vegetables, this is what helps you understand like how this stuff works, is that, the Peruvian papa, the reason why it grows in the Peruvian Andes is because that's where the perfect environment for this tuber is. That's where the perfect amount of water, minerals, pH temperature, and the right bacteria that's in the soil, in the water, in the air, right? The pollination, like all the pollinators, like the bees, the bugs, all the critters, everything there is perfect. So it doesn't need any help from men to grow it. So, but they, they see this Peruvian papa, and so the Spanish people are like, okay, let's take this back to Europe and grow this thing over there, and make it a new product. So they take it back, but now they find out that they can grow it, right? Because you need those 5 components. So you can try to mimic the amount of water, you can try to mimic the minerals, the pH, and the temperature, but to replicate the gut flora, or not the gut flora, but the flora, the environment, which is in water, in the soil, and the bees and everything, like it's nearly impossible. And so that, they tried growing that Peruvian papa, it wasn't growing. So what they did is they mixed the Peruvian papa with the Spanish patata, which is basically the sweet yam. And that's where the word in Spanish patata comes from, which is where the English word potato comes from, which is a mixture of the word papa and batata, right? That's basically like, how that came about. And now we have a potato, and now we can grow it in, places like Idaho and some of these other places. So I think that that's part of it. Another part of it is, in the case of grains, when you hybridize and splice them and change them, what they would do is basically, like in the case of the dwarf and some of these modern day grains, is they're essentially trying to find strains where they can grow 10 times the amount of grains in the same amount of land, or even sometimes in like a smaller amount of land. And it's basically about increasing yield and production without paying attention to the changes in like gluten, like the proteins inside of the grains or the starches. All of that changes, right? And so they weren't focused on that, right? They weren't focused on like, oh, is this going to make a healthier grain? No, they were basically worried about how much more grain can we grow here so that we can produce more grains and sell more and make basically increase profits from this land, kind of thing, right? So there's, I think, a variety of reasons, but in our case, I think that by us becoming educated and learning about how, gut health works, which is the same way that a plant's health works, we start to make better choices in our foods, right? And so now all of a sudden, like with this understanding, people watching this should be basically looking at the foods that they eat and asking like, wait a second, was that hybridized? Was that grown in soil that was rich in minerals, right? And as people become more aware of this, and they become aware that, hey, this is what's affecting their microbiome, this is what's affecting their immune system, then, I think that with that, our food supply, should get better. Like that's the reason why our food supply is crap. It's because people don't know this stuff, and they just go buy, they think, like my grandma once, when I was talking to her about this stuff, because a lot of older people, like they never had to deal with this kind of stuff. Like grandma, she grew up in a cattle. My grandpa was a cattle rancher, so they had a farm in the northwest part of Mexico. They grew their own food. They never experienced anything like this. And so what she said when I was explaining this stuff to her, she was like, "Why would these stores sell this food if it's not good for you?" And that's where most people are at, is they have that idea in their minds, like, why would stores sell food that's not good for you? And I mean, whose fault is it really? Like, is it fast food places? Like, is it their fault that our health is bad, or is it our fault for not knowing what's in that food and what that food is doing to us, right? That's basically like where we're at. And that's why I personally like changing, why I like this education, why I like sharing this information with people. Let's see here. Batata is potato and product. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. That's good to know. Baruch, good to see you here. All right, guys. Does anyone else have any questions? Because I'm pretty much done covering that. If not, if there are no questions, then so so this week, all right. So we've been dealing with vitamin D. This week we're going to start moving into now putting in some of the good nutrients into our diets to basically boost, mitochondrial function, right? So this is where we focus on coenzyme Q10, and then individually, some of you that that we've been talking, I know about some of your nutrient deficiencies. So we'll probably be looking at some of those, whether it's iron, selenium, vitamins B12, or like the B complex, all the full spectrum. This is basically the week where we focus on that, because now that you understand, like, okay, your diet is changing, you're uptaking more vitamin D. Now we're going to try to see if your body's able to uptake these nutrients. And this is basically where that jump start happens. Okay. Prior to vitamin D and water and minerals, think of it this way. Anytime that you try to like get some of these nutrients that you might be deficient on, it's kind of like trying to go to a car and you're trying to like, crank it, but it's just not going. It's just like, nyeh, 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 nyeh. Well, now with this, it should be able to actually get that jump start to like get going. If we can experience that, I'm telling you, like, this is really what gets me excited, because it took me years to figure this out. Okay. I spent so much money, I did so many trials, so many different things to get this little method going. And then from here on out, it's just about creating habits for long term and restructuring and optimizing your gut flora. And that's basically what we're going to be doing during Energy Bootcamp. And you can see, like, there's a lot of detail that goes into these diets. And that's why I'm only going to be, I have to like limit the amount of people because I only have so much time to go through it. So next week, I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be taking appointments to, anyone that wants to participate in Energy Bootcamp. This is where I'm going to be going in and, we'll do like an initial consultation call, make sure that you're ready for it. If you're just starting, here's what I plan on doing. I plan on running these challenges, so that if you want to participate in Energy Bootcamp, that you're ready for that step. Okay, Energy Bootcamp, there's no point in you going and detoxing and doing all these other, getting other supplements into your diet if your body cannot uptake them. Okay, like, save your money. Like, don't spend money on supplements until you're able to get your body to uptake those supplements. Okay, that's basically what my biggest wish is for you. Is the best thing that I can do for you guys. So if there are no other questions, then that's all that I've got for today. So just stay tuned for emails and other stuff. And one last thing. Primal Fat Burner, this book is an amazing book that teaches you about diet, and that is geared specifically for vitamin D. So I have a link in the description of this live video. So this is a book that I highly recommend everyone here to read. This is basically what you want to transition into. Part of my program, I'm going to be relying a lot on this book, but I'm also going to have a version for vegan. So anyone that wants to stick to more of a plant-based, I'm going to kind of have my own version of this book in the plant-based version, which is the diet that I did prior to the one that I'm on right now. So just to give people options. But then again, there's going to be certain little nuances, because I believe that, I use food as a way to heal the body. And I think that there's a lot of power in some of these foods. I think there's a lot of power in plant-based foods as well. So these are things that I'm currently working on, but that's just one that I recommend. All right. Last call for questions.
How do you know if your body is ready? Like, how do we know that? Like, if we are absorbing everything that we need, and how do I know?
So number one, think of a lot of your symptoms as kind of like a check engine light for your body. So sugar cravings, they'll start to go away. And so all of a sudden, like, you go through the day and you're like, wait a second, I'm not really craving sugar, right? That starts to tell you that your body's now burning fat as a source of fuel. And especially if you've been eating like good healthy fats, you just know, you just start to like feel your body. You just start to feel better. Things like, brain fog, dizziness, all of that starts to go away. And you just kind of like start to like feel like, my body's like functioning. And this is, this is a part where like I can, I can look at labs and like give you like different things to look at, but at the end of the day, what I've learned to do is to just listen to my body in that way. Where like, if I wake up and I have if I feel a lot of energy, I just know that I did something right. And usually like the way that I feel, in the morning is a result of what I did the day prior.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like how I start to like gauge. Right. And then as I go throughout my day, I can tell like, okay, like if I don't get sugar cravings and, I'm eating good, like healthy fats, I know that my body's uptaking those. If I get to go to bed and I'm able to fall asleep and get deep, relaxing sleep, that's one way that I know that my vitamin D levels are good, and that I've been able to like basically make some of these hormones like melatonin to be able to sleep good. Your mood, right? When your body's not uptaking these nutrients, and especially if you have like sugar cravings, like that's usually a sign that your insulin is on a roller coaster. Usually alongside with that comes moods like depression, anxiety. And when your body begins to like change, and you're able to uptake some of these nutrients, especially with like magnesium is such a huge part of relaxation. Like it relaxes your muscles. It also allows actual sugar to go into the cells of your body, so it's another way that to get rid of these sugar cravings. But you just start to feel like a calm mood throughout the day, right? And so these are all kind of like signs where you just start to feel them, and then after a while, that's where like you kind of like look back and you're like, okay, like I'm feeling good, I'm feeling better. And that's where you get into like a good groove and routine where you're like, okay, something is working, I can keep going with this. And then we just go from there, because then once you get to that point, then we do detoxes, and like those detoxes, that's where you start to see like big differences. And that's kind of like what happened to me. It's like once I did like my major detox, I haven't looked back. I've never looked at food the same. I realized like what I was doing to my body. And now this is why I do this now, where I share this stuff, because I know that it's possible. I know it's I want to say hard. It's just there's just so many nuances that people don't understand. But I think I've been able to package it and put it in a methodical way where I can replicate these results with the people. And that's where some of these testimonies are coming from. And I think, watching you participate in everything, like I think you're going to be like one of our next big success stories here. So I'm excited for you on that.
I hope so.
So, all right.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are welcome. Tina, how strongly do I feel about potatoes? I don't necessarily hate them too much, to be honest. I mean, if I were to eat potatoes, I would prefer to like go down to Peru and get like the actual heirloom version. In the case of regular potatoes here, if they're organic, I guess they're not that bad. And that point, it's more about um, understanding that you're not getting as much nutrients from it. Like you're not getting antioxidants from it. You're not getting some of the minerals. And obviously you have to cook them, and the starch in them is going to require you to drink more water and minerals, right? So it's just kind of like adapting to it. um, I would prefer sweet potatoes over regular russet potatoes. But those are changes that, again, like I'm not too like hardcore and like diet, like, oh, don't eat that, like that's super bad for you. I'm more like, like last weekend I had pizza, right? I'm more of like, okay, if I eat that, I know that I'm going to have to make up for it one way or another, right? So I had to like drink a lot more water and minerals, because I know that that starch was going to dehydrate me and demineralize me, right? So that's how I think, right? It's not about eat this, don't eat that kind of thing. It's like, okay, if you eat that, just understand what that's doing to your body, and understand what you're going to have to do to basically optimize. And so in my case, like my diet, the way that I think of it is I created habits, right? So like every day I eat practically the same. And it's funny because like I never thought that I would eat the same thing every single day and not get bored. But now it's not about getting bored or not. It's more like I just keep seeing my health get better and better. And it's a different goal. And like I still leave room to try out different foods. I'm a foodie. I love food. I'm still going to, you're going to see me eat foods, especially like later down the road. But right now, this is a transformation period for me. Like I'm going really hardcore on optimizing my microbiome and restructuring my entire gut flora. And that's why I decided to do all these live videos on Facebook and document my entire journey so that I can go back and point to people. It's like, watch what I did. Like it took an entire year, right? When I started, I did, did like 6 months of a plant-based ketogenic diet. Now you're watching me do, I don't know how many months I'm going to do on this, carnivore type of diet. And then I'm going to switch it up. I'm not exactly sure what my next move is going to be. I'm still learning myself. Like part of the reason why I love to teach is because it helps me learn. Okay. So in a way it also benefits me to teach because it helps me like put things in an order where I can go back and say, oh, maybe I should practice what I preach here and do more of this myself. Right. Like that. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why with this group, what I hope that you guys get into is understanding that as you guys learn this stuff, do this stuff, when you begin to share your journey, not only does it motivate you to keep going, especially when you start to inspire other people, like you notice how like when people post and you start to support each other, all of a sudden like there's a new person that kind of like joins. And when you feel that where you inspire someone to change their diet, there's something that happens there where it helps you keep going. But not only that, as you begin to share and you start to like go for that and make it like not so much about you but about making a change and impact in the entire world, there's something that happens with that. Like for me, like it's harder for me to like not do this diet. If I wasn't teaching this diet, trust me, I'd be more likely to eat junk food, especially like right now with everything that's going on. Right. But because I teach, I'm like, hey, you know what? I want to like try this experiment and then talk about it and teach about it. And it motivates me. And so like, that's actually a tool that I am using to stay and stick to my diet. So that's a tip. All right. Keep that in mind. Right. So as you guys start to share more of your journey, that's going to help you stick to this. Right. So, if you plan out like, okay, like the next 30 days, do it, redo the 30-day challenge, but now, you're doing it with, hey, now you're doing like this breakfast with it. And what you're going to see is like the improvements from, the next 30-day challenge. When you add the breakfast component to it, now that you have vitamin D and everything in it, your results are going to grow and they're going to start growing exponentially. Redo that 30-day challenge. I mean, I drink water every single day. To me, this 30-day challenge is already a habit. Like I just do it and show you guys to inspire more people to try it and get on with these habits. But every time that I do one of these, when I did like hormone boot camp or, like whatever other programs that I do, to me, I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm just adding like an extra layer and I'm teaching something new and I'm basically helping people go through the same process. And in that process, I'm improving and optimizing my own diet. So I hope that helps you. All right. I think that's it. So we're already past an hour. All right, I'm gonna go make dinner now. Thank you guys for being here. I hope you guys found this helpful. We'll be in touch this weekend. If you have time, let me know when you work. And because I want to do a call with you for mindset. And that's it. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening, night, wherever you're at. And I'll talk to you guys later.
Good night.
Good night.